this topic right now is front of mind as we focus on this idea that the consumer is continuing to elevate their expectations and is looking for extreme hospitality, which of course, items being in stock is really the foundational layer of that. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And I'm really excited to be here with Brad today, to explore the future of store intelligence and to understand kind of how inventory plays a significant role in that. And if you are, let's say if you have a proliferation of SKUs, or if you're on the other side of that, kind of how does that change the model as well? I always thought when I was an analyst, I never could understand, like on the street, like, okay, so there's an item, it's paid for, and it's now theoretically out of inventory. How does the physical store not know that they are kind of running low or running out, and especially if it's in the back? And what we'll talk about here today are some of the challenges from a store operations level and really kind of getting into some of the weeds and how Simbe and the store intelligence platform can really help retailers execute more effectively, drive revenue, ROI, and really focus on KPIs. So these are some of the challenges that Simbe solves. In the same way, we'd all prefer to get a cure from the doctor instead of just sharing our symptoms, right? And so many retailers around the world are now using the store intelligence platform and really focusing on real-time inventory counts, which are absolutely critical. And also, I would say taking a big step back and thinking about kind of price and promotion accuracy and getting that as close to perfection as is humanly possible. As we think about the autonomous mobile robot that Simbe built called Tally, I remember seeing Tally at, with a lot of fanfare at different conferences and whatnot, and to see really where it's kind of gone from and to is, and being with Brad along much of this journey, I really have to say, and I don't say this lightly, it's exceeded all of my expectations, not only in terms of returns, but in terms of what this robot is able to do and how it's able to change, kind of store item level availability. In terms of, the really interesting aspect of this is not only are customers happier, but employees are too. So Brad, thank you. I could go on, but we must discuss this amazing report and some of the findings. So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely, Deborah. Such a pleasure to join both you and Stephen, and so excited to share some of these results certainly with the broader audience.
So it's interesting because I've, with Gen AI in particular, I've been thinking a lot about this idea of who benefits, right? The big or the small. And so it's a constant conversation I'm having these days. And as we look at the results here, how do you kind of think about that?
Absolutely. As we look at sort of the results here, I think what's quite clear is whether you're a large retailer or a small retailer, you're certainly experiencing a lot of operational sort of related, sort of challenges. So we believe the opportunity exists, regardless of size, from a volume or market cap standpoint, store size, SKU, format, sort of, et cetera. The real challenge here, from our perspective is historically there's kind of been just this data gap or lack of visibility that truly exists in the actual state of sort of operations. So historically, what most retailers would have to do is, perform manual audits in their environment to understand how they are performing with out of stocks or price promotional errors or their planogram resets, assortment, sort of, et cetera. And what we know, today, in comparison to sort of modern automation and sort of AI, those types of solutions cannot provide sort of the same level of sort of visibility. So we see these types of challenges really in each retailer, regardless of size or segment.
As we think about the impact of sales associates being able to spend more time either with the customers, with their peers, learning more about the product, what's been the like when you've talked to them, when you've talked to their managers, what have you heard from them in terms of how this is changing, how they think about the retailer? Are you seeing any kind of data around decreasing turnover? What are some of the stats, and what is it that you would say is exceeding your expectations when it comes to store associates?
Absolutely. I would say the number one thing we're seeing is actually store teams really embrace this level of technology. I think certainly from the outside, when store teams would hear something about sort of automation or sort of AI, it raises a lot of questions on what does that mean to them and sort of their day-to-day role. But as it relates to sort of our technology specifically, or the broader segment of sort of shelf intelligence solutions, what we're seeing is store teams really embrace them. It helps to really take away the mundane or sort of monotonous task of performing shelf or store audits every week. And it really helps them sort of prioritize on what are the most sort of actionable, or sort of what are the most sort of important tasks within stores. So we've not only seen incredible support, at the store level, and that's anyone from an inventory clerk or pricing coordinator clerk to the store manager, but also involved really at sort of the corporate level, with where, I think for the first time in retailers' sort of history, they have a true speedometer for sort of store level execution. It's not, we didn't perform as we expected today. Is that because nobody bought, or wasn't the product on shelf, or the promo executed as intended? And for the first time in history, we can really answer those types of questions at scale.
It's really interesting. And I mean, I still remember people telling me, "Oh, you've got to go to this BJ's location and see this really cool robot," right? So there has to be an element, I think, of novelty. And is there anything you've seen from, the customer perspective in terms of how they view this, how it changes their experience? And certainly, at least in the early days, and probably even, kind of through the maturation, it's got to drive more store traffic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you can imagine, for most shoppers, what they know about sort of robotics and AI is, often what they see in the movies, or, they have a basic vacuum cleaner at home, or have started to experiment with generative AI tools like ChatGPT. But I think what's really exciting for a company like ours is we have the opportunity to bring automation to a place that 500 million consumers step into grocery stores, sort of every week. And the reaction has been incredibly positive, as you could expect. Certainly children in the younger demographic certainly are really excited and enamored by Tally. But the way we really design the solution is it's designed to sort of blend into the environment and sort of largely do its job. Certainly, I think the technology has a level of attractiveness to get more consumers to shop in stores. But the bigger piece that we actually hear is consumers actually definitively see this technology driving a better in-stock position. So if we look across sort of our grocery segment of sort of partners today, we've definitively reduced out of stocks in, these stores by sort of 30 to 60%, which is, really, really meaningful amounts. And, certainly these are things that start to become, very apparent to shoppers, especially as they have increased expectations in today's day and age.
Very helpful. We have a lot of questions. I'll dive into a few of them. Thanks to Anna for this one. What kind of infrastructure does a retailer need to implement the tool?
Absolutely. So today, to operate a tool like Tally, we simply just require a 2 foot by 2 foot parking spot on your store floor, an electrical outlet essentially nearby, and then sort of basic Wi-Fi connectivity. And getting this type of solution up and running is really quite rapid. We can build a map of your store environment within about 30 or 60 minutes, and with that same day, we're capturing high quality data from your shelves. So it's really easy for retailers to begin experimenting with this technology. especially given the type of business model that companies like ours offer.
Great. And then are Simbe devices, this is from Michelle, are Simbe devices on the store Wi-Fi network, or are they SIM enabled?
Yeah, so certainly I would say like 99% of our deployments today are typically store network enabled. I think what we found, at least in the segments we operate in today, and although, we got our start in grocery, and that historically has kind of been our bread and butter. We've done a lot of work in clubs, sort of wholesale, mass merchant, alcohol stores, other sort of environments, including clothing and sort of sporting goods retailers. We found that, most of these environments have reasonable, sort of connectivity today, if not for their own store teams, but potentially for, shoppers or partners coming in the store as well. Certainly there have been some select projects where out of the gate we may have used cellular, but connectivity has not been an impediment that we've seen across the stores we've been in so far.
Okay, questions are pouring in. Mike has asked, are the store maps unique to each individual store, since almost no two stores are identical?
Yes, absolutely. So our technology uses a process called simultaneous localization and mapping. It's very similar to the way sort of Google Maps sort of maps, sort of the outdoor world with their sort of Google Street View car. As Tally traverses the store, it's fusing its sort of sensor data together with each step forward that it sees. So we're able to precisely see where every shelf set or fixture is located in that moment. These maps are highly dimensionally accurate, and based upon them, you can clearly identify where all the shelving structures of interest are, and even temporary sort of promotional displays. So every time we traverse the store, we're actually looking for changes in the environment and can sort of update the map. And these are one of the reasons why, particularly for large format environments, a mobile platform is sort of so compelling compared to fixed infrastructure. It's just able to keep up with changes more seamlessly and capture higher quality data.
Right. And then this one's from Matthew. Do you see, actually, I had this question too, so it's a good one, Matthew. Do you see ESL as a critical component to the price and promotion execution? Are retailers leaning into ESLs, or is the CapEx still too great?
Absolutely. So,
Oh, and
when I
for those
look
of you who don't know, I'm sorry, electronic shelf labels.
yes. So when I look broadly across the market today, I would say the two most common in-store technologies we see retailers implementing are sort of shelf intelligence related solutions like Tally and electronic shelf labels. So we have a number of partners that have deployed electronic shelf labels, and including some chain wide. What I would say is there are really interesting ways for tools like Tally to work for ESLs. So as we know, many stores go through hundreds or thousands of price changes sort of every week. It's easy for retailers to understand how much labor they're spending on ESLs, but what's harder is to know their true price and sort of promotional accuracy. So Tally has been a very valuable tool out of the gate to help retailers really build the business case for ESLs to see if it makes sense for them. And as I shared, certainly we have partners that felt like it made incredible sense. And there's deeper tie in there. We do work like when Tally sees a product that is out on shelf, we can actually communicate with the tag via ESL. If there's inventory in the back room, we can help update that tag to say, ask an associate. But certainly there are some retailers out there that view that they'll be on paper tags for some of the foreseen future. So Tally can help close the gaps, for those folks that feel that paper tags are the right fit for them.
And I don't know if we can cue a video at some point, because I know that's not in the deck, but Greg did ask a very good question. Are there any pictures of what the speaker is talking about? So maybe we can leave just a few minutes at the end, or, Brad, we can take down the deck and just let us know. But I do think that's a good idea. Thank you, Greg. So we can, Brad, maybe just leave the last 5 minutes and we can just show
Sure.
some photos or whatnot. And we can certainly send them out to people who are on. So I really like this, to me, it's all about efficiencies and whatever you do. And I think there's always so much that you can learn from other stores, from other retailers. And if if we think about, kind of the level of some of these, it's really, I think, much higher than anyone would expect. And if you think about the, kind of these inefficiencies, whether it's managing out of stocks, price promo, planogram compliance, or allocation assortment planning, and we're hearing right so much now about the last around allocation assortment planning. How do you kind of take all of those, shake them together, and kind of like what falls out first? And, does it differ by type of box or even, independent, regional, national, club, discounter, drug, grocer? How should we think about, I know it's like 12 questions in one, but how do you think about these inefficiencies? Who has the greatest opportunity, and how does the kind of store intelligence platform work to help them?
Absolutely. So when we think about sort of the size of the prize or ROI around combating some of these inefficiencies with automation or AI, we believe it's really important to kind of tie things specifically back to, capturable business value and how you sort of overlay this on sort of the P&L. So, irrespective of store size or sort of format, we know that there's quite a bit of labor dedicated to, performing audits, whether you're value or drug, whether you're grocery, whether you're mass merchant. Certainly as you go up the stack, it's more and more hours. So it's really easy to calculate how much labor you can free up to focus on more meaningful tasks. And what most of the retailers we've worked with has found is this type of automation solution is, greater than a 1x ROI on sort of labor alone. So given sort of the labor challenges there, it becomes a no-brainer. As we start to unpack these other buckets, I would say most retailers start with sort of out of stocks. And given the way that companies like ourselves sort of measure stores, it's really easy to tie the missed opportunity on shelf to your traditional, sales velocity of products, inclusive of things like switching and substitution, and understand your missed opportunity on either a margin or, sort of revenue sort of basis. So that's kind of how we start going through the stack here. The same is true with price and promotion. With, particular promotions, you would expect a certain amount of sales lift. We see the average missed promotion for a grocer could easily cost them, $5 to $10 in gross margin with sort of each cycle. It's not unusual to find, tens or maybe hundreds of tags that may not be either executed on time or at all. And then with sort of planogram, I mean, if you think about how much effort goes into aligning sort of merchants with their partners, with trade spending, and optimizing for consumer performance, so much of this analysis historically is just looked at sort of point of sale data. You now have a new data feed that feeds into, is the placement what we really expected? And what we often see is there's gaps either in sort of shelf holding capacity or store holding capacity that are causing sort of out on shelf, scenarios sort of throughout the day or throughout the week that could be better addressed, now that they sort of have this level of visibility. So these are some of the ways that we work to sort of really unpack sort of the business case. And I would say with most retailers, typically they start to see a 4x plus ROI, layering across at least the first two on this list plus labor, within about the first sort of 60 or 90 days.
Is there any risk that, a tech startup I was part of, we would kind of focus on compliance? And so, right, because if it's not on the floor, you can't sell it. And if you have trade dollars to do that, that would be unfortunate. How does Tally kind of help retailers and brands align? And what kind of reporting is given, if any, to the CPGs?
So today, a number of our partners that have taken Tally to scale have, in partnership with us, begun sharing this data with the broader ecosystem. And so that's been sharing that data with a number of different constituents. Those could be the CPGs or the manufacturers themselves, the brokers, market sort of data insight companies, that kind of thing. I would say most retailers move very rapidly to sort of understand their gaps and sort of address them. But much like any of the other sort of syndicated or insight-related sort of data feeds that exist in the industry, they see both a data monetization opportunity and a profit center sort of around this data, as well as a better together strategy. Because as they do their yearly business reviews or quarterly business reviews with their key brand partners, they now have an additional data set to bring to the table outside of point of sale data or shopper insight data at sort of the category. And, back to, defining shelf holding capacity, store holding capacity, shipment and delivery cycles, this data can be incredibly valuable for those types of conversations. So our partners today, from a retail standpoint, have been very open once they've operationalized this data themselves to begin sharing this data with third parties.
Okay, lots of questions for you, Brad. This is from John. This is a good question. How does your platform interact with items being locked up to prevent shoplifting? Are out of stocks higher or lower at retailers locking up items? In other words, what's the impact of organized retail crime?
Yeah, absolutely. So today, the way we perform our scans, and again, one of the benefits of using a mobile robot solution is we kind of perform a raster scan of the aisle, and hopefully there's some time where we can kind of pull up some quick shelf examples, before we finish here as a group. By doing that, you're actually able to kind of, see around, the door jamb of, for example, a freezer or cooler, because you have perspective as you're coming by. The same is true with glass. We do not use an external light source, so we've optimized our optical system in a way where we don't require an external flash. There are solutions out there, but anything with glass ends up looking like a mirror. So that doesn't help you from sort of analysis standpoint. So no problem whatsoever sort of seeing in those fixtures. Certainly there are less, out of stocks in some of those scenarios, but certainly we recognize there's, deeper friction, both for the shopper sort of as well as the store team. We have seen this type of automated intelligence actually be really helpful to combat shrink and get to root cause. And happy to talk more about that as part of the session today as well.
Okay, great. Well, we have a lot of questions, but let's move on to the next slide, 'cause I think it's got some really interesting data. As we think about the kind of optimizing different aspects of the store, and thinking about kind of where to put human capital against that, where are they going to get the greatest ROI, right? We're seeing much more of a focus from retailers, I would say, in 24, because of a lot of these Gen AI tools. They're quantifying more at the store level. And I think also trying to think about how to compensate people in a different way. And so these are some of the conversations that are coming out of, I'm sure, with retailers who are working with Simbe right now. As you think about like who's investing where, did this data kind of come in line with what you thought, or where was it different than you expected?
Yeah, I think certainly this is, directionally in line with kind of what we're seeing. I would say, what we're seeing in market is the most progressive retailers are recognizing that, technology like automation and AI is going to need to sort of permeate a bunch of aspects of their business and to help them unlock more value. And they continue to operate in this world where they have to do more with less, whether that's on the labor side or sort of supply chain, sort of constraints. I think what's exciting about Simbe is, the growth within our business, have been doubling or tripling, every year since the beginning of the pandemic. And have the fortunate opportunity to do some work with some incredible partners at scale within the market. That's folks like Schnucks, BJ's Wholesale, Spartan Nash, Wake Fern, sort of a number of others that have also shared some of this value in sort of proof points, either within sort of the major industry conferences, as high level as sort of in earnings calls or sort of analyst briefings. So certainly we're seeing this use of technology giving these types of retailers a competitive advantage or differentiator within their market.
Yeah, I think I was on the BJ's earnings call and you were mentioning, I was like, oh, I know him. So no, it's we've got a few questions. So Mike, does Tally key off the shelf label UPCs or does it recognize the actual products? Asked differently, can Tally work in a non-planogram environment?
So the way we designed the solution from the beginning was not to require a planogram initially at all. Certainly having that data only allows us to do deeper sort of analysis as time goes on. But when we think about providing the most basic value out of the box, where we start is there an empty region, correlated to that sort of specific tag? So that's sort of step one. We then layer in sort of more advanced analysis where you do apply things like product recognition to identify scenarios that may exist, like plugs or spreads, or you may have certain areas in your stores that have promotional fixtures that are not actually tagged. So you have to depend on sort of product recognition sort of in those ways. But I think, again, the beauty of autonomous solution compared to a lot of fixed infrastructure has to depend on ground truth, traditionally like a sort of planogram. That's not sort of required in this scenario. We actually build a realogram every time we traverse the store. And we can compare that with the planogram to understand, where there's divergence.
And, as we're spending a lot more time, I would say, with decision makers on the tech side. So whether it's CIO, CTO, CDO, what's important for them, in your opinion, to keep top of mind as they're thinking about, if they have extra budget, let's say, this year, where to invest? And, I'm sure many of them are already thinking about 25 as well.
Yeah, I would think a couple areas is certainly there's a lot of great proof points in the market of where technology has sort of worked and also where there's sort of been a graveyard. So I think it's important for teams to sort of understand, Deborah, you and I talk to sort of CIOs and these types of folks sort of all the time. And I think one of the things we often hear in market is like, everybody says they do everything, or, everyone sort of says the same thing. I think it's really critical, to build the muscle around sort of diligence and understanding, does this solution partner, really have, the proof points that they're sort of claiming, like, what's been the value that they've unlocked for sort of other partners. As we think about sort of scaling, I think a lot more of it then becomes internal and introspective. A lot of this becomes sort of culture fit and sort of change management sort of at scale. Tally provides a data signal that's going to touch almost every one of your sort of core business processes. And being able to sort of embrace that and reach across the aisle to merchandising, sort of supply chain operations, facilities, whoever it may be, is really important. And then certainly with any big sort of technology decision, being able to articulate, the business value and sort of the ROI that we talked about, previously. And that's something where we spend a lot of work with our partners and clients, using the real data from their environment to calculate sort of the true ROI, for them.
So I was going to let it slide, but we have several questions asking the same thing. So thank you, Greg, Michelle, and Sophia. So if I were to kind of take all those questions and put them into one, is basically, how do you think about shelf-mounted cameras versus, kind of autonomous? And, what are you've talked about a little bit, but maybe just kind of like dive into a little more, even if you can talk a little bit about either ROI or cost and how to think about that, but maybe Brad, several people would like a deeper dive.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'd share from our perspective as a company, we're mostly known for Tally, our fully autonomous mobile robotics solution. However, we've built fixed infrastructure sort of as well. So I think what's unique in our viewpoint is we've had the chance to put these technologies sort of head to head. I will say in large format environments, that's from, grocery on up, and then sort of a function depending on sort of size of drug and value. The mobile robot, unlocks sort of the most amount of value. So number one, you're managing one device, not hundreds or thousands of devices. Two, it captures higher quality information. So denser optical system, closer to the shelf. It's not as sort of planogram dependent. With fixed infrastructure, overhead cameras, you're not really going to see the back of the shelf. You're not going to decode, shelf tags. Opposing shelf cameras, they need to be incredibly dense, or you're not really going to have good perspective at top and bottom of shelf or sort of corner of the images. And I think what's so important in deploying this type of technology is really the accuracy and the precision and the coverage, because otherwise store teams sort of won't embrace it. That said, we really believe sort of fixed infrastructure sort of has its time and place, and convenience stores is certainly one area. And then, as I shared, I think it becomes really sort of an ROI function as you get into value and drug segments, sort of which solution is certainly better. I think we've been fortunate to celebrate the largest number of chains and sort of adoptions sort of within this space.
And as retailers think about getting started, right, which this could definitely seem overwhelming as I'm putting myself in their shoes, how do they, and I'm sure it's different for every client, but what's a typical kind of approach to working with Simbe, and then how do they scale, and what's the data that they're looking at to make a decision to keep scaling?
Absolutely. We try to do the kind of crawl, walk, run methodology with most of our partners. As far as crawl and getting to know each other, we're helping to understand their assessment of sort of their current challenges sort of within their environments around all the topics we're sort of covering today, based upon the existing mechanics of sort of their business, kind of sizing or estimating the ROI before we step in. We typically recommend most retailers try kind of 5 to 15 stores out of the gate. And the reason for that number is, we often see retailers that like to take exciting technology to sort of 1 or 2 or sort of 3 stores. They're often next to sort of their headquarters, so they have a greater labor mix. They're seeing executives all the time, so they have greater execution. It's really important to get measurement points across a variety of store volume levels, store formats, execution levels, sort of, et cetera, as you think about sort of building the business case. But we've had a number of, chain expansions, literally with this technology being on the ground less than sort of 6 or 7 months, coming back and saying, this has been one of the most transformational things in our business. Like, how do we go to scale, and how do we go to scale fast? So I think those are some of the biggest things. I would really encourage retailer investment sort of in the process, because at the end of the day, data and intelligence is nothing without action. And, as a company, although Simbe can help put this information in front of store teams, whether it's, through their handhelds or, mobile apps, reports. At the end of the day, the corporate entity really needs to, drive the process and sort of accountability around it. And the projects that we've seen that are most successful in the industry are those where they sort of start their Monday morning meetings, evaluating shelf performance and sort of all of their stores.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that right along with sales, right, would go hand in glove.
Exactly.
So this I thought some of the data here, this focus on reduction in out of stocks and where we've seen the benefits. Does that number, that 49%, surprise you in terms of reduction in out of stocks?
So not at all. As we've seen empirically across our grocery clients, typically we see kind of a 30 to 60% sort of reduction in out of stocks, kind of out of the gate. I think one of the pieces with out of stocks that is also really relevant is reducing backroom inventory and sort of holding capacity. Having inventory that's just sitting in the back room is something that's not sellable, and it's costly to sort of everyone. So we've seen opportunities within these accounts to reduce, with this data set, backroom inventory, by about 80% as well, and get to more of sort of a just-in-time sort of inventory model. But these types of benefits are quite clear. Those retailers, whether they were on paper tags and had 2 to a 10% tag error rate, we get them to 99.5 or 99.9. The same is true if they move to ESLs. And our helpful point is of that process. So these benefits are, well in line with what we're seeing in market with these case studies.
I have to say, I still remember when Target, it was either an analyst meeting or an earnings call. I think it was an analyst meeting. And they were talking about, this was like one of those things that you never forget, the efficiencies that they were seeing because they perforated the kind of tags for price, as opposed to someone having to like cut them. And I'm like, wow, I didn't know that like perforation was like next gen technology. And so, I mean, I'm not picking on Target. I mean, it's, I think that's just emblematic of the industry. And so as you think, and right, like that really started, although I thank them because that really helped me start to think differently about store labor. As we think about that in a Simbe perspective, are you finding that, I mean, is there like an average in terms of number of hours, and certainly would differ based on size of box, but then if they're saving, where are they redeploying those hours? So it's a two-part question.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say for most grocers or sort of large format grocery moving into mass, we're seeing anywhere from a minimum of probably 2 to 3 hours a day, to maybe in some cases for the bigger stores, 5, 5+ sort of hours a day. But yeah, certainly being able to save kind of, 20 to 50 hours a week, depending on sort of store size. So that's where it gets back to, there's kind of a 1x at least ROI alone on freeing up that labor. Where we see that labor going is traditionally, 2 places. One, it's more effectively managing the back stock and price and promotional errors. So, really focused on just, instead of looking for problems, just fixing them. The other is, more deeply investing in sort of the customer service or e-com side of the business. So these folks stepping in to do picking operations. And one of the pieces we hadn't talked about yet today, but this type of data is incredibly valuable for e-com type operations. So if we think back to our map discussion, we're building a map of every store and we know precisely where every product is. We calculate the least cost path between sort of every product. So with this data set, we've helped retailers reduce pick times, depending on the box size, by about 15 to 50%. Just by being able to, calculate the optimized, sort of routes, for the team members.
That's actually, I mean, how how do, if you're the CFO, since this is more kind of, I don't know if we want to call it robots as a service, so there's not the CapEx, how are they measuring? Because some of this is intangible. I mean, I guess you could do NPSs and whatnot. But right, you've got employees, customers, and then sales, and I'm sure there are many other things you could look at as well. But what time period are they looking at evaluating the metrics? And then how are they thinking about this from a financial perspective?
Absolutely. So when we first get into these stores, our goal is to kind of establish a baseline and actually show kind of shelf health with the corporate entity before store teams start getting data. So we align on like what's the true out on shelf rates, across your initial store footprint. Once we start,
what are those from what you've seen?
yeah, it certainly varies from segment. I would say grocery today, I would say most stores we step into are kind of between a 4 and 8% out of stock rate. Anyone that embraces this technology can easily get their out in stock rate to sub 2. And we have some stores that are, approaching, 1%, which is sort of really exciting. Certainly there have been some environments that are sort of even higher than that. But I would say most operational leaders that we work with on the grocery side kind of develop this mantra. They call it 2 and 10, but they want their stores to all be less than 2% sort of out of stocks, and keep addressable out of stocks, meaning the product is in the back room, to sub 10%. But many of those stores we step into for the first time, 80% of the out of stocks or 2/3 of the out of stocks are addressable just sitting in the back room.
Do you find that when you aggregate that data, is it 50% of the time? What percentage of the time are the real out of stocks greater than what they expected when you measure them?
Certainly it varies depending on stores. I think there are a lot of incredibly run stores out there with great operational leaders, store managers that are doing the shelf audits, essentially themselves. But I would say nearly every store that we've been in, there's been a delta. It's been a question of sort of how big that delta is. Just a lot of this comes back to this, concept that stores have never been measured to this frequency and fidelity. Like, average large format grocer, we're identifying precise, stock state and, price accuracy for all 30,000 of their SKUs, like 3 to 5 times a day, right? Whereas before they were kind of taking sort of, just intermediate samples. So I would say the greatest disparity maybe has been as like high as sort of 3x. Like, you step in and someone's like, I think we're at 2 to 3 sort of out of stock rate. And the reality is they're sort of much higher. It's hard to just with the human eye sort of walk down an aisle and really understand where the store is at, unless you're really measuring it holistically.
Perfect. All right. A few more questions and then we'll wrap. A lot of questions. This is from Katie. What are the potential pitfalls of evaluating this kind of technology that we can avoid? Can you please refer to learnings from progressive retailers who may have learned such lessons already?
Yeah, really, really great question. I think, first and foremost, I would say, talk to your peers that have maybe operationalized this technology at scale. There are incredible proof points out there, Schnucks, BJ's, Spartan Ash, Wakefern, sort of a bunch of others. Many of these entities have looked at every piece of technology sort of out there already, and many of those folks took years to sort of do that. So there's a level of due diligence I think folks can, really build from. I think the other, which we hit on sort of a little bit, but was just making sure that folks are internal, the internal readiness is there. We've certainly stepped into a small number of projects where we had one incredible champion, but, just couldn't necessarily drive alignment with the rest of the folks, even though there was a huge, sort of size of the prize there. So I think internal alignment is, sort of really, really critical. Certainly there's some lightweight data integration to maximize the value of this type of solution. The good news is typically that's data that's externalized already today, which may be your weekly price changes, your balance on hand or PI information, or authorized sort of products lists. But those are some of the big, pieces.
Okay, we've got three more questions, and just to give you a kind of a path, Brad, is Simbe highlighting perpetual, this is from Mike, is Simbe highlighting perpetual shrink on problem SKUs based upon how often Tally identifies zero on hands?
Yes, so we are helping our retail partners get to sort of root cause there. So there's data fusion that's happening, essentially behind the scenes. We see products not on shelf now. It was on shelf earlier, but nothing went through the front end, over a certain sort of period of time. So these are sort of these classic scenarios. So Tally's data is helpful, to pinpoint times for people to go in and look at sort of security footage, sort of, etc. Something we didn't talk about, I believe so far is we have dual sensing modalities. So, for grocery, computer vision makes a ton of sense. It's a lot of, fast moving sort of packaged goods. As you get into sort of higher value sort of retail, RFID business case, certainly makes a lot of sense. And there's a lot of great retailers out there leveraging RFID for clothing, consumer electronics, etc. You can get to more precise sort of PI counts there. So, we've been in stores that were looted, and within, really kind of minutes or hours of this facility being secured, we knew precisely what was left and where it was located. So certainly there's a lot of value in this data set to kind of get to root cause around shrink.
Right. This is from Mark. Have you seen any functional digital stock taking systems that work, shelves with load cells, et cetera, remove the human eye count? I think basically, are you seeing any other new technologies in terms of shelf stable cameras?
Shelf cameras, the technology isn't really changing. Certainly, camera technology gets better, sort of every few years. There are opportunities, I think, in certain categories like fresh, where you could think about other types of sensing. Is it hyperspectral, multispectral? Can you score the ripeness coefficient on the avocados, and are the bananas rotting from the inside, and the moisture and nitrogen coefficients? So I think there's some interesting things in some of those sets. We're covering perishables today. We check on things like rotisserie chickens and meats and these types of areas. Certainly fixed technology will get better over time. I think a lot of what's been deployed with opposing shelf cameras has also been battery backed, which creates huge maintenance implications, because you don't have like ping power and pipe to every shelf. So just some of the things to think about as it relates to fixed infrastructure.
Okay, and I'm going to just kind of close it out with this question. There are many more, which I think goes to the excitement and enthusiasm, and I think for many this is right, understanding, Brad, the kind of what's real versus what we've kind of imagined can be done. I think that you've helped to kind of set the stage for that today. So I think that's just, I think we've gotten so many questions, and this has been incredibly helpful for many. So this is from David. Do you have any data on how much inventory you've been able to take out of the system by reducing safety stocks?
Yeah, so with controllable out of stocks, we know it's been a large, like we've been able to reduce that number by about sort of 80%. I think specific inventory, I would have to go back and chat with sort of our customer success team to get sort of the real sort of numbers there. But we certainly have a number of grocery partners as well as specialty retailers that don't have a backroom concept. So I think the other way to think about this is Tally is used for, sort of lows and sort of automatic reordering in sort of those types of scenarios.
Okay, so I'm gonna just add that with my own question. Have either from a cultural perspective or if we had the math, anything, to kind of fall into that last question around, reduction in waste?
There's huge opportunities on sort of the food and sort of perishable side. There's a lot of variance depending on format and category. I can tell you that from sort of a high level. Some of the work we're doing in more of the warehouse type environments is just, making sure product that's first in is first out. As you think about sort of expiration lives and these types of things, these sort of map to the shelves as well. Certainly there's some strong data points there we can make better available to the market, but we see variance depending on sort of format or category.
Right. I'm not sure in our last few minutes if we've got any photos or videos or anything that you can put up,
I
Brad.
can share if someone can pass presenter to me.
All right, Brad, while we're doing that, how did you come up with the name Tally?
So Tally is influenced from the just English definition of the word tally, to count. And yeah, Simbe kind of came from this play on sort of simulated being, but really this idea of building automation tools that work in concert with people was kind of really the sort of background there.
Very cool. You should have control, I think.
Great. Let me just move quickly sort of on this. So as Tally goes up and down the store aisles, and typically we show like live demo of the product, but just for kind of speed here as we were online, we capture a bunch of high quality 2D and 3D image data with varying perspectives. So we're typically imaging the shelf with at least kind of 12, minimum sort of 12 cameras. We can effectively see top stock in wholesale club type environments. We're seeing up above 25 feet, actually up in the steel. And once we sort of capture these images as we're performing sort of this raster scan, then we're applying our proprietary computer vision and sort of AI to identify what type of fixture are we looking at, segment every shelf, segment every shelf tag, whether standard, promotional, decode the barcode, do OCR on the tag, do product level identification on the product itself, and model. But essentially it gives us the ability to then ask questions about this category and set, which of these empty regions on shelf, have balance on hand, or, which promos don't match the pricing file. And we can start to begin doing, really basic sort of comparative sort of operations. This data is made available to retail partners in a variety of sort of formats. We have mobile apps, printed reports, business intelligence tools, but our goal is to really meet retailers where they want to be met. We've certainly have some really sophisticated partners that are just like, hey, give me this data through an API, and sort of run from there. Some of the case studies we've talked about sort of out in market, SpartanNash actually shared this data at Grocery Shop last year, but they were able to reduce out of stocks by about 60%. We're spending about 2.5 hours per store per day on shelf audits. This is examples of sort of pricing and promotional, sort of improvement for paper tag folks. So they had a 3% tag error rate, got them to sort of a 99.9 or 99.5. This is the type of pretty classic information we see when we get into a store. So this group of initial 5 pilot stores started with sort of 5 to 6% sort of out of stocks, and us getting them to sub 2, and then addressability to sort of sub 10. So that 2 and 10 sort of mantra. Regional grocery chain case study, 30% less out of stocks was more than 10 million in gross margin for them. So just gives you a little bit of the type of things that, we're kind of seeing, out in market.
Right. I mean, Brad, I think that this was the beginning of an education for many of, many who joined us today. I want to thank you for, we really just skimmed the top of some of the questions. So thank you so much for your patience. But I think that the data from the survey is incredibly interesting in terms of where retailer pain points are, the technology that's available to them right now. And then as I think ahead, even to the rest of just this year, as we're seeing more with retail media networks and whatnot, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here in terms of the potential for, Simbe to really be kind of, I mean, it's right, you have this kind of, one point of truth, if you will, that really kind of helps, I think, this whole ecosystem work in a much more efficient way.
Hmm.
And I think you're really, you're really driving this foundational level with the store intelligence platform to help, kind of grocery, CPG and beyond. So thank you for what you've done, and congratulations, as I've watched through the years.
Hmm.
And if you want, we've got literally 1 minute left. If you want to just kind of close this out.
Yeah, absolutely. And Deborah, Stephen, thank you so much for the opportunity. I think what was so exciting to me is we've been so heads down with a number of retail partners on, these specific case studies and scaling in the market. This research was so validating as we reached out to, these 150 folks and got feedback from so many senior leaders, across sort of the retail industry to, help validate what we were seeing sort of firsthand in these types of projects. So I think, the marriage of these, both this research as well as these proof points will yield a lot of fruit for the market. So couldn't be more excited about where the industry is and where it's going. Have the deepest appreciation for what retailers do every day with sort of food and everyday essentials, and the very small, part of the process and sort of role that we serve. So encourage folks to kind of reach out, to Deb and Stephen and myself if they'd love to sort of learn more. But hope to have the opportunity to engage and meet with all you in person someday. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Great. Thanks, Brad. Thanks everyone for joining us. Take care. We'll talk to y'all soon.